real test is what happens that next day and what happens the day after.
He works inside founder-led companies after the obvious answers stop working. The sales process is clear. The meetings are happening. Everyone agrees on what needs to change. And a month later, the company is still behaving the exact same way. This conversation is about what organizations keep tolerating after reality has already shifted underneath them. This is Decision State. You described a company where everyone agreed on the sales problem and the recommendation was clear, but nothing actually changed afterwards. So once that started happening, what became visible to you about that organization itself?
Owners tend to stay in the do nothing camp because it's safe, because they feel like there is a risk associated with trying something. And we urge you that there's actually a risk in the do nothing, because in the do nothing, the world around us is changing and the world is happening to us as opposed to being proactive and trying to better the organization ahead of the real problems. I've acquired 2 businesses, both of which were doing fire sales, and I've seen what happens when the do nothing compounds year after year after year. Typically what happens is you lose market share. The ultimate demise is the business.
What does behavior look like inside even that company week to week? Is there a pattern that starts to form and you can measure it that way?
When you make a recommendation or you say, hey, let's do this, how quick is the action? Every interaction is a data point. What is their facial expressions when you tell them something? Does this look like it's going to lead to the next step that we need them to take? You should be looking for all of these signs simultaneously. Is this organization going to be quick to adapt, or is it going to be slow to adapt? And if it's slow to adapt, you're going to have another set of steps that need to happen. There is still going to be a level of fear with the people that are going through that change. Why are they doing this to us? What was wrong in the past?
So does it end up being maybe one problem or one person who represents the problem most clearly, or is it a collective throughout the team?
In this case, it was a owner-driven business, and so owner is decision maker. So owner is the primary person. We've worked with other clients that actually have a pretty good management team in place. And now you're looking at the management team as a collective organization. They're a collective that are all having different personal dynamics as well as professional dynamics that you kind of have to understand and navigate. And so it really depends, right? It depends on the size of the organization, how the decision-making process is. Are we talking about a founder-led business where the owner still has the decision power and is the ultimate bottleneck? Or are we talking about an organization where there has been a transition of authority down to the level where the data is, so that they can actually make faster decisions, but are they making the right decisions?
So in that first example, that one person, what were they actually doing?
In that instance, were in a very wait and see mentality. They've had a 15-year-old business, and the good years where they were getting a lot of calls, and the bad years they weren't getting a lot of calls. And that was the dynamic. Well, I'm waiting for the phone. Well, that's not proactive. That's reactive. So how do we shift this into how can we do business development? How can we be in the right circles where your ideal client is in constantly? You have to be in the group and embed yourself in that culture or in that ideal client profile so that they know that you exist. Because if you're waiting for the phone to ring, they don't know you exist. They're going to call somebody else. Once you get to a certain point, though, you have to start transitioning into the next phase of your business so that you can continue that upward trajectory. If you don't transition, you'll plateau. That's what happens with so many businesses in America, is you plateau at whatever the owner's comfort level is, whatever the owner's ability level is. If your ideal future state is growth, you can't grow using the same tactics that got you where you are now. You have to evolve, and you have to adapt, and you have to change.
If you could walk us through what a TD Pine engagement actually looks like when you're deep inside a company, not obviously the overview, but what your week actually looks like.
I will say that it all comes down to understanding where the owner wants to take their business. I have experience sitting in the CEO seat of a family business and growing it from a lifestyle business into an actual growing organization. And we grew organically through getting into new verticals as well as through M&A. We acquired two businesses. My partner was the CFO of a 2,500 employee business. Before that, he was private equity, and before that, he was investment banking. So he understands high finance in a way that I cannot. And I understand operating a business in a way that he cannot. We combine our two experiences to be able to provide owner with a new way of looking at their current state. We start with understanding what the business owner wants, and then we start working backwards to say, okay, for that reality to be true, we need to create these milestones.
How often do founders think they're bringing you in for one problem and a completely different issue starts showing up once you're inside the company?
That actually happens pretty regularly because we need to understand what that end game is, what that end goal is. When we start working backwards, we say, okay, well, this is where the business is today. And a lot of founders, a lot of business owners in general look at their business as I started this business, so therefore I will know how to transition out of it. The problem is the transition, there's so many different risks associated with each one of those potential options. There's an instance where we were hired in to help with a transition out of the business, and in reality, we started helping with operations because the business isn't ready to transition out. We need to get operations to a point where we can bring on new customers. When we fix that problem, the customer base is going to be what we focus on next.
Is there a behavior inside a company that had made you think, okay, the organization may not actually move on this? Like you're advising them, hey, this is what you need to do, but the pushback.
Ultimately, in advising and consulting, you're providing the understanding based on market norms and industry norms, but it's up to the owner's comfort level on whether they're going to implement this or not, right? It's our job to make sure that they fully understand the risk of doing nothing. Or fully understand the risk of doing something that we advise on just partially instead of fully, because the outcomes are going to be very different. Every change, has a resistance to that change. Defining who the decision maker is and understanding what their risk tolerance is, what their goals are, all of that needs to be shaped into how a message is delivered.
And is there ever a time maybe a person in the company is reinforcing the old behavior, not realizing they're doing it? For example, you're advising, but they're stuck in their old ways, but they're not picking up on that.
We have a tendency to go back into what feels comfortable, especially when there's a management team that doesn't fully understand the vision. They don't fully understand why we're doing what we're doing. We've seen that countless times where there's an organization that isn't used to having meetings. But whenever you start putting a meeting on the schedule, all of a sudden their urgency around the day-to-day starts to pick up, and so they're not present anymore. They're looking at their phones. Maybe they don't show up at all. There's just a tendency to say, hey, why are we, what's the value of this, right? We just tend to gravitate back to the comfort level of the way things were. There's a saying of burn the boats. If ownership wholeheartedly believes in the new way of doing something, they need to make it so that you can't resort back to the way that things were. If you implement a new ERP system, but you allow your team to continue to use the old for a period of time, then the tendency will be to use the old. Because the new one has a learning curve associated. The real way to implement an ERP system is to have a cutoff date and say that after this date, you cannot use the old system.
Take a team example maybe that you've worked with. Maybe everyone agrees something needs to change, but nothing actually changes. They have no direction. What typically, if this is common, starts slipping first in the company?
What we tend to find is that what starts slipping is what's the most painful. That if there is an easy way out, the easy way out is always going to be the case. Back to that same example of people not showing up to the meetings. You're instituting a change, and if there is an easy way out of that change, it's going to be taken 90% of the time.
When you're in maybe long engagements, is there a time where you start trusting what people are doing more than what leadership might say is happening?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's always a disconnect between what leadership is saying was doing and what is actually happening. I say always a disconnect. There's varying degree of disconnect. You still need to talk to management about what is their perceived expectation as well as what they believe was happening, and dig deeper into the doers and the team members on what their perception is. When you have these interviews, you start to understand who's the one who gets things done, how strong the dynamics of the team are. Whenever you talk to people separately, is the message the same? Do we all know why we're doing what we're doing and how we're doing it? Or is there a disconnect between what we believe we're doing and what is desired, the desired outcome? Having those kind of one-on-ones as well as group settings are so important, because you can start pulling on those data points to see how big that disparity is.
Well, as a numbers guy, is there anything that you're looking at behaviorally to tell you what's the real story in the room?
You definitely want to see who is passionate. Anger can still be passion, right? Negative emotions can still be passion. So much dynamic is based on our personal character and our personal traits, that you see a dynamic that even though everybody has the same message, and when you talk to them individually, they all believe in the same outcome, the team is struggling in unison because a perception of this person's outbursts or this person's negative tendencies versus the team. And so even though they want to get to the same place, there's a level of dynamic that certain personalities clash.
Was there a situation where leadership kept describing the issue one way while the organization's behavior was clearly saying something else?
You see that a lot in the founder-led businesses where the founder is that decision maker. The owner sits there and says, "Oh, my team is empowered to be able to make the decisions, and they are they're equipped to do this, and all of this other stuff, right?" And then whenever you meet with the decision makers, whenever you meet with the doers, they're like, "No, I have to go to management to ask them about this, or to ask them about this, or ask them about this." And so there's a clear disconnect between where the perceived authority is and where the actual authority is. Once you start putting authority down to the right level, where that level is actually has the data to make the decisions faster, you start to see a more of a willingness to row in the right direction. If you don't give that level the authority, they're going to ask for the mundane stuff as well, because they don't want to get their hand slapped when they make a bad decision, or they I've seen this in fact in my own career, that at one point I had to push back and say, okay, I'm either going to have the ability to make mistakes or not make mistakes. And if I can't make my own mistakes, then I need to find another organization. When you don't give your decision makers that ability, they will ask that bottleneck to answer almost all of their problems.
In my experience, I always feel there's a disconnect or maybe a misunderstanding, a gap between agreement and execution. I'm not sure if that's something you've come across in your business, but if you could talk to that, if you agree.
see this whenever you're in that group setting with, especially when management's in the room. Everybody's going to agree with management. Regardless of whether they know how they're going to execute or what the next day looks like, they're going to say, oh, yeah, we get it for sure. But the real test is what happens that next day and what happens the day after. When is it that somebody's going to raise their hand and say, no, I don't understand? Because there's a lot of times that when they don't feel comfortable, it's like they're going to rather say, yes, they understand than ask the question, because you don't want to look like you're dissenting, or you want to look stupid. And so there's absolutely a disconnect between, because management has it in their head that this is clear. Like, I don't see how anybody can see any other view of this, right? But whenever you're in a group setting, there's tons of different views. Like everybody maybe even has multiple views. And a lot of times that view is not the same as what you see in the management. And so how do you create that comfortable environment where somebody is willing to speak up? Because that is something that management has the power to do. Management has the power to create an environment where somebody is willing to raise their hand. And that only happens when the decisions are not made at the top. That happens when the decisions are made at the department level where the data is, or as low as you can get that authority. You can have a much more successful culture. And it's amazing because you talk to owners like, I don't want my team to make mistakes. Well, then you probably are going to have the same problems that you're dealing with now. Because when you try something new, you will always make mistakes. Like there is no perfect outcome. And if somebody tells you that there is a way to flip a switch and everything's going to work great, they're probably selling you snake oil, and you should probably run. Because if you're going to try something new, there is always a learning curve, always a learning curve. And what's most important is to get through that learning curve as quickly as you can and get to the other side as quickly as you can.
Well, have you noticed certain types of organizations becoming especially good at normalizing obvious problems?
If I'm comparing a logistics company to a manufacturer to a service organization, the difference in their ability to normalize change doesn't change. It's how well the owner is to create that comfortable environment so that the organization is rowing in the same direction as quickly as possible. Are we giving the authority and the place for the team to make decisions as opposed to that one person at the top?
What is there a point where the organization no longer can avoid what's actually happening? You sit down with them, you say, this is what I think. Maybe they take your advice, maybe they push back a little bit like we discussed. But what's the point they reach where, is it sales typically? Is it numbers when they realize I can't avoid this any longer? Brandon's right.
What I always like to see, and I've seen this time and time again, I saw this in the organization that I took over, I see this a lot in our clients, is that the organization tends to mirror the leader at the top. Whatever the leader is good at, the organization is going to be good at. If the leader is good at business development, the organization is going to be good at business development. If the leader is good at operations and delivering whatever their service or product is, then same with the organization. And so the gap is also mirroring the owner. So if the owner is not good at the selling, or if the owner is not good at the delivering, or if the owner is not good at staying focused, if the owner is not good at understanding the finances, then it's probably going to be a cash flow problem. Understanding what an owner's gaps are, it's amazing how well that translates into the gaps of the organization. And so I can't point to one thing and say that it's always sales, because in some instances we've seen this actually where the owner is really good at selling. The selling is not the problem, but now you've got a backlog of a year. And so how can we get the sales flowing through the organization as quickly as possible? And so that becomes where we need to focus our time and effort and all that kind of stuff. And so it needs to be presented in a way that the ownership understands that because again, they have everybody has a gap. Everybody is not proficient at everything. There's no way for because humans are built to be societal anyways. And so we all have our strengths and understanding who has the strengths that complement our weaknesses is so key into getting ultimately what you're looking for out of an organization. And so understanding what the gaps are at the top level is an indication of what the gaps are at the organization level, and then presenting that in a way that if we can address this, this is where we're going. So let's start addressing it.
When you and your partner come in, is it walk through how you approach a company when, or they reach out to you, however the connection is made? Do you both go in together? How do you present TD Pine to people?
We've gone into organizations where operations is kind of a clear problem, right? Owner already says I'm struggling with the throughput and I can't figure out. It hasn't been a cash flow problem. I got plenty of cash, but I need to get my product or service out the door faster. And so therefore I would probably meet with them first and ask questions and that kind of stuff. Whereas on the flip side, maybe it's a cash flow problem. Then my partner would go in first. Very rarely, and we've had to just focus our time as judiciously as we possibly can. So very rarely do we both go in together because we need to see how serious the owner is. We need to qualify the opportunity as well because there are so many businesses out there that need help. So how do you help as many as you possibly can? And so we have to understand what the pain point is and how willing the owner is to fixing that pain point. Not just having the pain point is what we're looking for, because some owners aren't willing to change. And if you're not willing to change, you're not going to fix the pain point. And so you have to qualify the owner from that perspective. And then 100% of our clients, though, get the treatment of both of us because what we see the value in is it's not just operations. There is a finance aspect in every decision in the business, as well as there's an operations aspect in every business. And so how do we provide that combined support to an owner? Because our goal is to solve the problems that are detracting from that value growth. So that's the structure, is understanding how we're going to grow the value of the business and then how we're going to pull the right levers in which sequence to get there. And so we would typically have the initial call by understanding what that goal is. And then we will relay that back to the owner saying, okay, it's our understanding that this is your goal, and let's start identifying what is preventing you from getting to that goal. And then that starts to shape up what the steps are in the near term and the long term to get that created. And to your point earlier, sometimes the steps at the very beginning appear they're going to be one thing, but as you start to uncover more and more data, it's, hey, we need to actually shift and address this problem, because if we don't address this problem, then we're not going to get to where you're going. We were working with one client where they believed it was a sales problem. And so when we started pulling on it, it became sales isn't the problem. Operations is a problem, because if you turn on the spigot now and you start throwing a bunch of new customers here, we have no way of processing them. We have no way of keeping them happy until we can fix these problems. This is your bottleneck. And so when we address this bottleneck, now we can turn on the spigot and get all these new customers.
Without naming company names and people, what's going on in the room at that time? What's the whole situation for people involved, owners, management, employees?
What we typically see is they do the things that have gotten them to where they are and continue to do those things. So whatever has got them to the point of where they are is just how the normal day-to-day business is. In this case, there was no data-driven decisions. So there was no ERP system. There was no software that siloed information so you can have a decision maker that is responsible for this task and a decision maker responsible for this task. That's the value of an ERP system, is you can disseminate the information to the right people, to make that. So many businesses, especially when they're founder owned and founder led, they don't shift into a point where a subject matter expert is there making that decision. It's hiring jack of all trades, hiring somebody who knows how to do the sales and the fulfillment and the, well, that's very inefficient and it's very difficult to hire people. And so when you start to shift the organization into a way that, okay, I have a accounts payable department, and so that person's responsibility is to do all accounts payable. I might have a backup for that person, but that's that person's responsibility. It is so much easier to hire an accounts payable person than it is to hire somebody who can do all of the things. And there is a balance, right? You can't have a 20-person organization when it only has $500,000 in revenue. The economics don't make sense. But you need, if your goal is to grow, you need to do this in a staged way to get the next specialist into the role and take the weight off the organization, and do that in a staged way. And so when you ask, what is common, is that the owners haven't started thinking about this staged approach. I'm going to continue hiring the way that I've always hired, which is finding people who are balanced across all aspects of the business. I'm going to continue to sell the same way that I've always sold. I was talking to a potential client last week, where he was saying, I'm struggling to find owners or find businesses, find prospects who don't already have a supplier. So why are you looking for prospects that don't have a supplier? Well, because it's so difficult to get them to change suppliers. But that's the name of sales. Like, you have to show why your value proposition is so much better than the competitor's value proposition. And it's all a messaging thing. Like, there has to be an understanding of why that competitor is inferior to you, because they have longer lead times, because you don't want to boil everything down to costs, but maybe there is a cost difference. But you have to understand what your competitors are doing wrong and be able to leverage that. And so from what we were just talking about, if you're just doing the same thing over and over again and you haven't thought of a new way of doing it, you're not going to get to where you're trying to go.
That example you brought up a couple minutes ago, and you found out it actually was something completely different than what they thought it was. How did it resolve, and how long did that take to resolve?
In this particular situation, it started to resolve itself in about a month, because it was about a month to try to get the right data from the new problem, because now we have a new problem that we're identified. We're trying to see what the new state looks like and start to reshape it. But that's not going to always be the case, right? It just depends on how big the problem is. It depends on how big of a transition or shift it's going to be. And to our conversation earlier, everything is a data point. Every aspect of every interaction is a indication of whether this is going to go the way that we need it to or not. And so you're always kind of thinking in that terms of, but that didn't give me the results that I was thinking it was going to give me. And so do we need to pivot, or do we need to let it sit for a little bit longer? A month might be a short case. It might be a long case. It's relative, right?
For people who are listening, they want to follow you, they want to follow your work, reach out. Where's the best place to find you?
We love LinkedIn. We're on LinkedIn constantly. In fact, we actually have a book that's going to be coming out in a couple months. We're working on what the launch date's going to be, but it's called Job to Asset. It's it'll be on Amazon. It'll be on all of the key places. So watch for that. what is amazing is when you talk to an owner, they always say that their business is going to be their retirement, but they've never valued the business. They essentially have a job, and they haven't structured the business to be an asset yet. And so that's what this book is about, is how to get the tools to the owner so that they can start to structure their business in a way where it's going to give them the life that they're looking for.
That sounds exciting. I'll make sure that is in the show notes and for your LinkedIn for people to reach out that take a listen here and want to hear more. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for sharing all that, and really great to meet you.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate your time.
The meeting sounded aligned. The behavior said something completely different.